What if I told you that a king's greatest pride could turn into his greatest humiliation in a matter of minutes? On July 20th, 1545, on a sunny day off the coast of Portsmouth, all of England watched as its flagship, a symbol of maritime power, sank like a stone, taking hundreds of lives with it. It was not just the loss of a ship, it was a disaster that revealed the limitations of early naval artillery and the human factor. The entire nation, including King Henry VIII himself, witnessed how the imperfection of military craftsmanship turned into a national tragedy. His Majesty stood on the shore of Southsea Castle watching the battle begin and could not believe his eyes when his best warship, capable of striking terror into entire fleets, suddenly tilted and disappeared. The Tragedy of the Mary Rose is a documentary story told as a thriller, where every second counts and survival depends on a chain of invisible, fatal mistakes. It is about how human arrogance collided with the cruel reality of naval warfare. It is a story that teaches us that even the most solid structures can be destroyed by a combination of circumstances, and that not everything at sea depends on the will of the king. The Mary Rose lay at the bottom of the sea for almost 4 centuries, turning into an underwater museum. But even after centuries, it continues to tell us about the price of naval victory. Watch the video to the end to find out how a simple gust of wind defeated the entire English crown, and what was the true cost in sweat, pain, and lives of simply building such a formidable ship. Are you ready for the shocking truth about how ambitious King Henry VIII was in his naval projects? The Mary Rose was launched in 1511 and became not just a warship, but a tangible symbol of King Henry VIII's personal power and ambitions at sea. It was one of the first large ships specifically built to carry heavy artillery on its lower decks, marking the beginning of a new era of naval warfare. Its name was probably given in honor of the king's beloved younger sister, Mary Tudor, and the dynasty's heraldic flower, the rose. This ship was a veritable floating arsenal of its time, capable of carrying up to 91 bronze and cast iron guns after its reconstruction. The heaviest guns, weighing 2 tons each, were mounted as low as possible to ensure stability and fired through special ports with massive covers, which were a real engineering breakthrough. The Mary Rose served as the flagship of the fleet for over 30 years and participated in numerous naval campaigns against France, earning it the nickname, the ship that fought like a lion. Its crew consisted of nearly 200 sailors, 185 soldiers, and about 30 artillerymen, which was a huge number of people for that time. The ship was a source of national pride, and its modernization in 1536 made it one of the most powerful in the world, increasing its displacement to 700 tons. The ship's hull was made of oak, and its strength commanded respect, while its rigging allowed it to reach impressive speeds. The Mary Rose was not just a machine of war, it was a floating palace, with carved figures of the Tudors adorning its bow, symbolizing the dynasty's indestructibility. All of England believed that this ship could not be defeated, that it, like Henry himself, stood above all others. I'm very interested to hear your point of view. Why do you think the king relied so heavily on demonstrating his power with a single ship? Write about it in the comments. Guess what happened next when the French fleet approached Portsmouth? The last battle of the Mary Rose began with a confrontation between the English and French fleets, which clashed in the Solent Strait right outside the walls of Portsmouth. The French Armada, commanded by Admiral Claude Danbeau, was significantly larger, but the English counted on the superior quality of their ships and artillery power. The English fleet, led by the Mary Rose and the new flagship Great Harry, prepared for a traditional artillery exchange. The French fleet, consisting of large galleys, was more maneuverable and fought using tactics of quick attacks and retreats, avoiding direct confrontation with the heavily armed English ships. The key point was that the artillery of the time was imperfect. The guns, especially the heavy ones, had a very low rate of fire, sometimes no more than 1 shot every 10 minutes. This meant that maneuverability and the ability to quickly close in could negate the advantage in caliber. The battle turned into a nervous, chaotic, long-range firefight rather than the decisive clash that had been expected on shore. The English tried to lure the French galleys into shallow water, where they could be overtaken by heavy English ships. The French, on the other hand, kept their distance, using their galleys to attack and quickly retreat. The lack of coordination among the English captains and the absence of a unified, clear battle plan added to the chaos of the defense. The captain of the Mary Rose, the experienced Admiral Sir George Carey, was personally appointed by the king, and great hopes were pinned on him. He was a veteran of naval battles and enjoyed great authority among sailors. But even his experience could not change the fundamental flaws in the ship's design and firing tactics. The sailors were exhausted from the long wait, and the ship was overloaded. So the first stage of the battle showed that English superiority in caliber was no guarantee of victory, but knowledge of the terrain was only half the battle. But what if I told you that even food could serve a completely unexpected function and not just satisfy hunger? Read on to the next chapter to find out how a sweet treat turned into a field kitchen. You've definitely never heard of this unique secret. Unlike its predecessors, the Mary Rose had gun ports on the lower deck that were covered with round, massive hatches, which were a real breakthrough in military shipbuilding. These ports allowed heavy artillery to be placed below the waterline, which significantly improved the ship's stability and combat power. However, this innovation had a fatal flaw. Each port was a potential vulnerability, so the covers were made of thick, sturdy oak and sealed with felt gaskets to prevent water from entering. In calm weather, and when the ship was sailing smoothly, these ports were closed, but in battle they were open to allow the guns to fire. The lower gun deck housed the heaviest guns, which fired cast-iron cannonballs, inflicting critical damage on enemy ships. However, in the heat of battle, as the Mary Rose was preparing to make a sharp maneuver to close in on one of the French galleys, something happened that forever changed the fate of the ship. The French galley, commanded by Bartolomeo Zane, maneuvered to avoid direct fire, forcing Captain Carey to order a quick turn. To facilitate firing, some of the gun ports on the lower deck remained open, despite the risk. When the ship heeled sharply, the windward left side, which was turned towards the sea, rose, while the leeward right side sank. Due to the large draft and weight of the guns, the heel was greater than expected. Water poured into the open gun ports located just 1.5 meters above the waterline. The seawater that burst through the open openings instantly flooded the lower gun deck, rendering the ship uncontrollable. The weight of the water was enormous, and it created a free surface effect when the mass of liquid rolled over, repeatedly amplifying the list. This rapid and uncontrollable process prevented the ship from righting itself. This critical error, leaving the ports open while maneuvering, was a direct result of human factors: the desire to fire as quickly as possible and disregard for safety measures. A unique engineering solution designed to give the ship an advantage turned out to be its main vulnerability. There is a belief that when the crew attempted to right the ship, the sails were taut, which exacerbated the list. Like if you think the engineers should have foreseen this turn of events. What you are about to learn will change your perception of the final seconds aboard the Mary Rose. As the ship began to sink rapidly, a real drama unfolded on board, with everyone fighting for their lives. According to survivors, Captain Sir George Carey, realizing the inevitability of disaster, tried until the last moment to restore order and right the ship. He shouted orders, urging the crew to close the gun ports, but the chaos that had ensued was beyond control. The crew rushed upstairs in panic, trying to leave the sinking ship, but the design of the Mary Rose, with its high sides intended to accommodate a large number of guns, played a fatal role. It had only a few narrow exits to the upper deck, and all of them were instantly blocked. Most of the crew found themselves trapped in the hold and on the lower decks, victims of their own fortress. One of the few survivors, pilot Roger Odell, later recounted seeing Captain Carey standing on the main deck, trying to stop the panic until the water caught up with him. The captain died along with most of his men, sharing the fate of the ship he commanded. Witnesses from shore, including King Henry VIII, watched the horror unfold in complete helplessness. Attempts to rescue the crew were made immediately. Boats were sent from the nearest ship, the Great Harry, but they were only able to rescue 35 of the nearly 500 people on board. The rest perished, many of them trapped below deck. It is believed that the sailors were dressed in heavy woolen clothing and the soldiers in armor, which made swimming impossible. It is claimed that one of the English ships, the Mary Guilford, attempted to get closer to help, but its captain feared that his ship would suffer the same fate due to strong winds and rolling waves. This decision, dictated by self-preservation, angered the king. The tragedy was so swift that many did not even have time to understand what had happened. The ship's demise was a direct result of maneuvering, not combat, which was a shameful blow to the prestige of the English fleet and its commanders. But even the most cunning maneuver is useless if your pursuers have water. In the next chapter, you will learn how the Apaches turned the main source of life in the desert into a deadly weapon. Ready to learn more? What if I told you that one of the key reasons for the sinking of the Mary Rose was excessive self-confidence? The Mary Rose disaster was caused not by one factor, but by a whole chain of factors, among which fatal overloading was one of the main ones. In anticipation of the French invasion, a huge amount of additional supplies, ammunition, and people were loaded onto the ship, which significantly increased its draft. This was done so that the ship could remain autonomous for longer and have a full ammunition supply. Modern studies of the ship's remains have confirmed that at the time of its sinking, there were significantly more people on board than the official complement. The additional soldiers who were to provide boarding combat increased the load on the upper decks. This raised the ship's center of gravity, making it less stable than the designers had intended. The addition of heavy bronze guns during the 1536 modernization was a key factor. Although these guns were placed as low as possible, they still added hundreds of kilograms of weight, which was concentrated precisely where the waterline with the gun ports was located. The more weight there was on the lower deck, the lower the open ports sank relative to the water level. In addition, the hold contained a large amount of food, drinking water, and barrels of beer, which were necessary for such a large crew on a long voyage. All this extra cargo was concentrated in the lower part of the ship, reducing its buoyancy and stability. The ship sailed through Solent with a draft close to critical. Archaeological finds made after the ship was raised in 1982 confirm this version. A huge amount of diverse cargo was found on board, indicating hasty and irrational loading. The abundance of personal belongings, ammunition, and tools suggests that the ship was prepared for a long and difficult campaign. One of the leading maritime historians, Alexander Maxwell, describes the situation as follows. The ship was a victim of its own strength because it was overloaded to make it even stronger. This quote highlights the irony of the Mary Rose's fate. The loss of the flagship due to overloading in open ports was a lesson for the English fleet. Subsequently, stricter rules were introduced regarding the loading of ships and the mandatory closing of gun ports when maneuvering. But this lesson was paid for with hundreds of lives. The conclusion is that even the most formidable warship cannot overcome the laws of physics. The king's appetite for naval power ultimately destroyed his brightest jewel. It was not a combat loss, but a disaster caused by disregard for basic rules of seamanship. Ready to learn about the thing that saved millions of lives? Shortly after the Mary Rose disappeared under the water, desperate attempts to raise it from the bottom began. King Henry VIII, who witnessed the tragedy himself, was determined to recover his flagship and immediately ordered a rescue operation. This mission, led by Italian military engineer Pellegrin and English Admiral Lord Lisle, was one of the first attempts to raise such a large ship in history. The main idea was to use two other ships, which were to be positioned on either side of the sunken vessel. The plan was to connect them to the Mary Rose with strong ropes and then, at low tide, pull these ropes as tight as possible. According to the engineers' calculations, when the tide began to rise, the force of the rising water would lift the sunken ship from the bottom. Hundreds of workers in the largest ships in the harbor were mobilized to carry out this task. Ropes as thick as a man's arm were attached to the protruding parts of the masts that were still sticking out of the water. It was a job that required enormous physical strength and incredible coordination. But the plan proved impossible. The Mary Rose was too heavy. Its 700 tons of displacement, compounded by the weight of water and silt that had filled its hull, created an unliftable mass. Every time the ropes were pulled tight, they either broke or simply tore off the fragile superstructure of the sinking ship. After a few days, it became clear that the attempts to raise the ship were futile, and the rescue operation was called off. The Mary Rose sank completely into the silt, and its location was lost for centuries. The failure to salvage the ship was a second blow to the king's prestige. Shortly thereafter, most of the ship's superstructure was either dismantled or destroyed by the tides. However, because the ship sank with its leeward side down, most of its starboard side and everything inside was preserved, covered by a thick layer of silt. It was a kind of absurd trick that preserved it for future generations. Despite all efforts, the very fact that the ship could not be raised demonstrated the technological limitations of the era. The engineers were enthusiastic, but they had neither the appropriate technology nor a sufficient understanding of the mechanics of lifting such large objects. The king's initiative failed. In the end, the only things that were saved were a few cannons and some rigging that were easily accessible. Everything else remained at the bottom of the sea, becoming part of marine archaeology. How many people today do you think would be able to make a candle with their own hands?
Rediscovery of the Mary Rose will change everything.
What you are about to learn will change your understanding of history. The Mary Rose remained forgotten for 437 years until its location was rediscovered in 1971 by a team of marine archaeologists led by Alexander McKee. This discovery was a real sensation and one of the greatest archaeological projects of the 20th century. The ship was found in the Solent Strait, partially submerged in thick silt. Because the ship was in cold water and sealed by silt, which prevented oxygen from getting in, its wooden structures and thousands of artifacts inside were preserved in amazing condition. Unlike other sunken ships, the Mary Rose was not destroyed by shipworms and decay. This created a unique time capsule of the Tudor era. For a decade, from 1971 to 1982, archaeologists worked painstakingly to remove artifacts from the ship's hull before deciding to raise it. More than 19,000 items were recovered, providing insight into the daily lives of sailors in the Tudor era. Personal belongings, weapons, medical instruments, navigational equipment, and even musical instruments were found. Among the most valuable finds were complete sets of soldiers' personal weapons, including bows, arrows, pikes, and unique artillery pieces. The finds showed that all social classes of England were represented on board, from ordinary sailors to members of the nobility. They even found a lice comb, which once again shows the realities of life at that time. The most difficult stage was raising the remains of the hull. On October 11, 1982, in the presence of Prince Charles, and watched by millions of television viewers around the world, the remains of the Mary Rose were raised to the surface. This engineering feat required unprecedented precision and the use of special lifting frames. The surviving starboard side of the ship, which made up about 1/3 of the original volume, was transported to Portsmouth. It became the centerpiece of a special museum dedicated to the ship. The raising of the Mary Rose was not only an archaeological triumph, but also a powerful symbol of the revival of England's national maritime heritage.
A powerful reminder of its past.
The sinking of the Mary Rose was a tragedy, but the thousands of artifacts found have allowed us to hear the voices of those who perished on board. Unlike dry historical chronicles, these objects reveal the human factor of the disaster and the personal stories of each individual. For example, wooden plates and bowls with carved initials belonging to individual crew members were found. Of particular value were the personal belongings of the gunners found next to their cannons. And among them were measuring instruments, compasses, and unique wooden powder cases. These finds gave us an idea of the level of training and craftsmanship of the people who operated the formidable weapons of the time. The remains of a ship's carpenter were even found on board, who at the time of the disaster was apparently trying to repair one of the parts of the hull. Next to him lay his tools, a hammer, a chisel, and an adze. This find is tragic evidence that people fought until the last second, trying to save the ship. Thanks to the analysis of the remains, it was possible to determine the origin of some of the crew members. It turned out that not only Englishmen served on the ship, but also people from other European countries and, surprisingly, Africans. This suggests that the crew of the Mary Rose was much more international than previously thought. In particular, the skeleton of one of the crew members, named Remains 119 by archaeologists, showed that this man was from North Africa. This discovery radically changed the understanding of the composition of the English fleet in the 16th century and the role of different peoples in its history. The remains of Captain George Carey himself were also identified, allowing historians to reconstruct his appearance and even speculate on the causes of his death. These human stories, hidden underwater, proved to be more valuable than any historical document. One of the archaeologists working on the recovery, Mark Jones, said, "We didn't just raise a ship, we raised a whole Tudor world that fell silent in a single day." This quote underscores the cultural and historical significance of the discovery. The sinking of the Mary Rose had not only tragic, but also important technical consequences for the English Navy. The disaster clearly showed that placing heavy artillery on the lower decks, close to the waterline, was an extremely risky engineering decision. Military engineers of the time learned that a ship's stability was more important than the maximum number of guns. After the loss of their flagship, English shipbuilders began to revise their designs. New warships were built with higher sides and greater buoyancy. Gun ports were placed higher above the waterline, and the design of the ports was improved to ensure faster and more reliable sealing. Despite the tragedy, King Henry VIII did not abandon his maritime ambitions. Just a few months after the sinking of the Mary Rose, he ordered the construction of new, more advanced warships to be accelerated. The fleet was not broken. On the contrary, it became stronger thanks to the lesson learned at the cost of the flagship's destruction. One of the main problems was the organization of the crew and discipline. The inability to quickly close the gun ports in a critical situation was recognized as a result of poor training and weak crew discipline. Subsequently, stricter rules for crews and regular training in extreme situations were introduced. Gradually, the English fleet moved from galleys and unreliable Portuguese caravels to more stable, heavy ships that could effectively engage in artillery combat at a distance. The Mary Rose fell victim to the transition from medieval to modern naval warfare. Today, the remains of the Mary Rose are not only a museum exhibit, but also a working scientific laboratory. After being raised, the ship's hull underwent one of the most complex and lengthy conservation processes in history. The wood, which had been lying in water for almost 440 years, was completely saturated with water and required the gradual replacement of moisture with a special preservative solution. First, the hull was irrigated with cold water, and then during the 1980s and 1990s, it was treated with polyethylene glycol, PEG. This process lasted for decades and preserved the structure of the wood. Today, in a special museum in Portsmouth, the ship is housed in a climate-controlled hangar, where it is gradually being dried out. Next to the hull itself are thousands of artifacts found on board. The exhibition is designed to give visitors the fullest possible picture of what the ship looked like and how people lived on board. In fact, it is a reconstruction of a life interrupted in an instant. The Mary Rose Museum has become a center for research on the Tudor era. Scientists are studying not only naval history, but also medicine, nutrition, crafts, and even the genetics of the people who served on the ship. The ship continues to yield knowledge. This vessel is not just a sunken ship. It is a timeless monument to the human factor, reminding us that technical superiority can be instantly negated by a single mistake. The memory of Captain Carey and his crew is immortalized in their personal legacy, which we can see with our own eyes. The story of the Mary Rose is a story of how pride turned to dust in a matter of minutes. They had the most powerful ship of the era, but lost not to the enemy, but to the laws of physics and their own human factor. It was a bitter but valuable lesson that changed English shipbuilding forever. Ultimately, the Mary Rose outlived its era. Its demise was a tragedy, but its rebirth was a triumph of science and history. The ship that sank as a symbol of weakness now stands as a symbol of resilience and the incredible work of archaeologists. Which of the finds on board the Mary Rose do you find most touching and why? Was it the lice comb, which bears witness to everyday life, or the tools of the carpenter who fought to the last? Share your opinion in the comments and don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on new research into historical mysteries.